For the third year and counting, Richard Skipper has been celebrating the artists you love. Richard Skipper is all about celebrating life, art, and his guest body of work. Please join us while he showcases these diverse and talented individuals. Here's Richard Skipper.
Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. Who or what are you celebrating tonight? Well, first of all, I'm celebrating all of you for being so patient in waiting for us to go on tonight. I guess the shadow of Mercury retrograde is still looming over me because I was having all kinds of glitches trying to get on tonight. But I am so excited about tonight's show because I am bringing someone to the show that I have become such a fan of. Matt, I discovered you a few weeks ago when I saw your incredible piece on the life and legacy of Leslie Jordan. And that hooked me. And at the end of that, you mentioned your latest book, Hi, Honey, I'm Homo. What a great title. And I said, I just got to have this guy on my show. I reached out to you and thank you for saying yes. So before we even get to your book, who or what are you celebrating tonight?
Gosh, well, I mean, I think the book is first and foremost on my mind. I'm very excited to get this book into folks' hands for anybody who loves television and queer history and LGBTQ characters throughout our vast television past. I'm very happy to to have this work that I can now get in front of people. It comes out in just a few days. So yeah, I think that's my cause for celebration.
Well, that's an oxymoron because when are you ever not in front of the camera?
You know, it's true. I do spend an awful lot of time just making stuff for the internet, but you know that I just can't stop. I can't be stopped.
Well, we don't want you to. We're going to get to your book in just a few moments, but I am older than you are, and I am a product of 1960s and 70s television. I grew up at a time, and I've talked about this before, when there were three networks: ABC, CBS, and NBC. Those three networks vied for the largest demographic, and so they would have those character actors from my generation, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, and they would all come together on whatever television show or variety special that was on. And I want to ask you, did you grow up? I know you're from Seattle. I'm from South Carolina, opposite ends of the world, actually. Did you grow up in a television household?
No, actually. Well, yes and no. I grew up in a house where television was given a lot of thought, I guess. My parents were very cautious and deliberate about the media that we as kids were exposed to. So TV was something that we typically watched as a family. It's something that we talked about. It wasn't just something that was kind of turned on and left on. It was something that I guess was given a lot of was the power of television was respected to the point that my parents were careful custodians of our attention. So there was actually a lot of things that I missed out on because one thing, there's only so many hours in the day, but also we definitely as a family, me, my brother, my parents. There were things that we all watched together, like Star Trek was a big part of our lives. Even when I was very young, I remember watching Sesame Street as a family. So it was something that was very communal for us. But I missed out on a lot of the stuff. I was alive when Golden Girls was happening, but I didn't watch Golden Girls until years later in reruns. Same thing for a lot of the topics that I talk about now. I often missed when it was on, and then came to later and was like, wow, this is actually great.
Well, I grew up when Bewitched was in prime time. I also had the good fortune. I was very good friends with Peggy Pope. And Peggy Pope, of course, was on Soap. And those immortal words came out of her mouth to Jody. Are you a homo? And and years later, getting to know her, and we talked about this. And of course, at that time, it was so far ahead of its time, and there was a lot of controversy around the show. Now, you just mentioned your brother. Is it just the four of you, your parents and your brother and yourself?
And a dog, but yeah, it was very, nuclear family.
Okay, and I asked for a picture of you at 5 years of age.
Hmm.
I love this photograph because there's so much going on in this photo.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about this 5-year-old boy.
We have a lot in common, me and him. I uh, definitely like I have very little memory of this, but I apparently wanted to be a flower for Halloween, and so my mother very creatively accommodated that request, made a cardboard flower costume for me. I was absolutely over the moon for it. I guess I had kind of like a little farmer outfit going on as well. And yeah, that was I distinctly like my one memory of this time is going door to door, house to house, and people just referring to me as the flower, and they're still doing that to this day.
And well, that's good. Well, the reason I asked for the 5-year-old self, because to me, the 5-year-old self is the purest self. It's before life begins to tell you, at least I used to think this, before life begins to tell you who you should be or who you shouldn't be. Teachers start telling you who you should be and who you shouldn't be. And you get a lot of that from your peer pressure. Um, you and I are both openly out gay men. Um, at what point in your life, because you've made this your life's work and your mission, and I thank you for this, for really shining a light on queer culture through television and other means. One of my favorite books, and maybe yours too, is The Celluloid Closet. And I do believe that your book is to television what The Celluloid Closet was to film.
I really appreciate that. Vito Russo's work with Celluloid Closet and his activism really is an animating force for me. It really is a North Star for me. That the incredible work that he did, analyzing our history through motion pictures, and also mobilizing people through the '70s into the '80s, and getting people to prides and to marches and looking after people's health during for the early days of the epidemic. um, he's an incredible guy, and yeah, it is one of my favorite books. Literally, it is within arm's reach. I can pull
Great.
the I have the book
Mine is
right
on the
here.
shelf over here. So yeah.
I love that we've got it close by. And that's wonderful praise to hear that, to hear those, that you feel that my book.
No, I absolutely do mean that. And I want to ask you, I mean, I grew up in the South in the 60s and the 70s. I moved to New York in 1979 at the age of 18. And I have said this before, I'm giving a lot of information out tonight, everyone, but I was probably the most asexual person to come out of the state of South Carolina. I didn't really know a lot or had tapped into my own sexuality. And coming to New York in 1979, it was really 10 years. You mentioned Stonewall Uprising in your book. It was literally 10 years, almost to the day of Stonewall happening. Uh, by the time I came to the realization of who I was and what I was all about, the AIDS crisis had hit New York big time. And a lot of people that I knew and that I worked with passed away. You mentioned the Golden Girls earlier. Golden Girls in bars in New York City in the 80s was the thing to do on a Saturday night. No matter what gay bar you went into, chances were that at 9 o'clock, Golden Girls was going to be shown, and everything stopped. And it was just this incredible coming together. And of course, we didn't have social media in those days. You went out to meet other people. Why do you think that Golden Girls, and of course, you cover a lot of this in your book, resonated so deeply with the gay community?
I never get tired of hearing stories about gay bars playing the Golden Girls on the monitors in the '80s. It makes me so happy, and I think that there are a lot of reasons that gay men really took that show up as appointment television.
Mm.
I mean, one is just it was a fantastic show, and you'd have to have a heart of stone not to love the Golden Girls. But also, even coming into the show before it even started getting made, before it was even a real product on the air, those women in the cast had a lot of gay, elements on their resumes. So gay audiences would have been familiar with them already. B. Arthur had gay episodes of Maude. Rue McClanahan appeared in a Leonard Matlovich movie, and in the movie Some of My Best Friends Are. Estelle Getty, of course, in Torch Song Trilogy on Broadway. and and Betty White, recently to the Golden Girls had been on Love, Sydney, which was a somewhat short-lived sitcom with a gay character, a blink and you miss him gay character. So
My
all of those,
husband actually went to a taping of that show.
wow, that's
So,
remarkable.
long
I
as
wish
him.
Love, Sydney is one of those holy grails of lost media that I wish was more widely available. But anyway, so there's that element, and then of course there were a lot of queer people behind the scenes, and they had the gay character in the pilot episode. But more generally, this is a show about a family of people that came together, mostly unrelated by blood, but it's what Armistead Maupin would call a logical family. People who it makes sense for them to be together. They look after each other, even though they aren't, genetically related in most cases. It's a family arrangement that I think makes sense to a lot of queer people. So there's that, and of course the show wasn't shy about tackling gay characters and lesbian characters, having an episode about HIV. Given the times when a lot of programming was still a little wary or conservative about LGBTQ issues, here you have a show where a character's brother comes out of the closet, comes back to marry his partner. You have a lesbian on an episode who falls in love with one of the characters and is not, ostracized or rebuffed to, it isn't met with disgust as it would have been in a lot of other contexts on television. So it was a show that made, I think, it clear that queer people were welcome. And, if you're good to the gays will be good to you. And I think that's certainly what we saw with the Golden Girls legacy.
Well, when did it begin for you? I mean, was it a particular character that you were drawn to on TV, or because you've made this your life's work? Where did it begin for you?
Gosh, well, so I think my love of television, this is going to sound a little strange, but my interest in television, at least, I think you could trace back to the show Fraggle Rock in the 1980s. I was a young kid. We had HBO as I think it must have been on like one of those free trials where the premium cable station is free for like a weekend. And my parents very diligently taped as much Fraggle Rock as they could and just played it on a loop. And that is a show that did a lot to inform my values as a young person. Jim Henson made that show to teach young people basically how to be good human beings. And
Exactly.
I hope those values. I do feel that those values really I internalize them. And also, there are a lot of queer people working on that show. There's gosh, I have a whole video about the gay connections to the Muppets and folks who work with Jim Henson. But if you want to call it scholarship, although I think of it more as storytelling, my interest in telling stories about the making of TV probably came first in college. I went to college for film, and that's where I really discovered like mass media and dove into it and really started just consuming everything I could. And then a little bit later on YouTube, I was doing a lot of queer activism. I was making videos about what was happening with marriage equality and how people can get involved in things and guiding
And you've
people
written
to.
an amazing book about
Oh
that.
yes, thank you. Yeah, I wrote a book, Defining Marriage, about the history of people who fought for marriage equality. And I started to see, because I've done a lot of work in the entertainment industry and I've done a lot of work in um, activism, and I started to see how those two circles overlapped, and they're really similar fields of interest. That media and television and entertainment, the movies we watch, the shows that we love, those help shape us as people. They help us understand who we are and help us imagine how we could be better. And in fighting for, I was very involved in the fight for marriage equality. I was part of I was part of the team that brought the lawsuit to the Supreme Court. And it really opened my eyes to how much entertainment does to, to help us become better people. And so it was actually the Golden Girls was sort of my way into really studying that stuff and finding the great stories. I made a video, this is maybe like 7 or 8 years ago at this point, but I made a video about the episode of the Golden Girls, Isn't It Romantic, where Dorothy's lesbian friend Jean, played by Lois Nettleton, comes to visit.
Yes, great episode.
Just fantastic. It's written by the wonderful Jeffrey Duteel, who was responsible for a lot of other queer stuff on television. And just an amazing piece of television, so forward-thinking, so wonderful. And so I made a video about just what a great episode that is, and how did something so great wind up on television, and all the wonderful things that episode does, and in showing an audience how to respond when you meet somebody who is openly out and an out lesbian in that case. The show really models good behavior while also being incredibly funny. Some of the most quotable lines from Golden Girls history come from that episode. And so that's where it began. People really responded well to that on YouTube, and I was like, I like making this. People like watching it. I think there might be more here. And sure
Are
enough,
you
there was.
surprised at how your channel has taken off in the way it has?
I'm really gratified. It makes me so happy to know that other people love this stuff as much as I do, that they love these shows, or that they're excited to discover them with me. To see I've just passed around a quarter million subscribers, and those are folks who share a passion for telling amazing, not just absorbing the great pieces of movie and television history and the queer perspective on it, um, but also learning about the people who made that stuff and the struggles that it took to get it on the air or get it into theaters at the time. Um, and so yeah, I'm very happy, and always pleasantly, I don't know if I'm surprised, but I'm very delighted to see that other folks are ready to join me in this exploration, this adventure of looking into all these incredible stories from our past.
That's great. Like I said, the show that really pulled me in for you was your show that you did on Leslie Jordan, and there were so many things that I learned about him that I didn't really know. For example, I love, and I've been telling everyone this story, of his sponsor saying, when you go out, see how you can be of service to other people. And I think that that epitomizes the work that you're doing as well. I think you're creating a great service to everyone, but there are certain things like when in the book you write about, for example, the episode of the David Susskind show, and I
Mhm.
remember watching David Susskind. He had a lot of very controversial shows, but one of the episodes was about homosexuality, and at the end, he did refer to it as an illness, but saying that there's no reason for us to be mean to them. Well, right now, are you surprised where we are in the world right now? In the United States, I should say, but it's happening around the world, with how far backwards we seem to be going?
I wish I could say I was surprised by that, but if you look back over the history of civil rights in general, but particularly queer liberation, um, it is a repeating pattern that there will be advances and setbacks. That there's a pendulum or a tug of war, or whatever you want to call it, where these advances that we've had a really good run for the last 2 decades. Starting around 2000, particularly in media, things have been getting better and better and better, more or less. Even in the George Bush years, which were not great, but it was during that time that we got you know, uh, sodomy laws overturned, and we made a lot of progress in the state to state on marriage, and also, gay characters appearing on television, of course. So we had a lot of advances over the last 20 years, and you know, uh, you could kind of predict, not to be too much of a downer about it, but often the good times are followed by some bad, and I think the lesson there is that liberation is not a project that concludes. It's something that has to be defended. We see it in the 1970s when, just after Stonewall, there was a surge in visibility for queer people on television and film, followed by a backlash that gave us the family viewing hour and wiped all that stuff away for a little while. Then another surge, and then Reagan's election, which put a conservative slant on television for a while. And then, of course, the 80s got very dark and difficult for a lot of people. Then a surge again, and it goes back and forth. And we've had such a great 20 years that it does not totally shock me that at some point the party would enter a rough patch. And I think that hammers home how important it is to not just celebrate our victories, but to defend them.
Well, getting back to Leslie Jordan for a moment, if you don't mind, one of the things that he said, that he would be somehow somewhat titillated by seeing certain people like Truman Capote on the Johnny Carson show or something. But then what really surprised me was he talked about how repulsed he was by it, that he would literally throw up after seeing certain people like Truman Capote on TV. Um, there are certain people that jumped out at me. Like I grew up again at a time where, uh, Paul Lynn was not only on Bewitched, but was shortly after that was doing Hollywood Squares, and the a lot of the jokes that I watched at that time made no sense at all to me at that time. But now I remember watching one of the episodes and asking, um, they asked him, what do you call a female sheep? And his response was beloved. And I was sitting with my grandmother and I said, what does that mean? And I still remember that my grandmother wanting to change the channel because I was taking her in a direction that she didn't want to go in. But when you saw as a young boy and growing older these men and these characters on TV, what was your initial reaction to them?
I think it varied. I think I had an experience that sounds like it was probably similar to Leslie Jordan's in being fascinated and repulsed by Paul Lynde. In fact, I certainly I went through a time where I just could not stand him and or his work. I couldn't stand the work that I saw on the screen. And to look back, I think what may have been going on there is a tendency to look down on in other people the things that we are self-conscious about in ourselves,
Hmm.
and also perhaps to fear the criticisms that might be levied against us by other people. I was very aware and very self-conscious about being detectably gay. That is not something that I'm no longer self-conscious about that whatsoever, but it was certainly something that made me self-conscious at various times in my life. So yeah, but that having been said, there were other characters who I found really empowering. I think characters in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I remember in high school when I stumbled across that film on VH1. It was being broadcast in sort of a expurgated version because there are bits in there that could not be broadcast. But I remember seeing these characters who were moving so fluidly between their work as entertainers and their lives as really fleshed out real human beings. I found that really intriguing and fascinating, and also very beguiling that they had there was a community, that there was a group of people, that logical family. It really gave me something to aspire to when I was young and a bit isolated. This is mostly pre-internet, living in a suburb in Connecticut, so did not have a lot of access to gay community there. So anyway, there were characters that I found very inspiring. Like I think in particular Hugo Weaving's character in Priscilla really um, gave me a lot of comfort and was to an extent sort of a model for me in the sort of work that or the sort of life that I would want to have. Will and Grace, I don't think I knew what to make of. There was that life of wealthy gay men living in New York City seemed very alien to me at first, and
Well,
then
you bring
somebody.
up a very interesting point because there are certain shows that to me are stereotypical. When I see a lot of like my husband and I, we've been together 34 years. We've been legally wed, going 11 years, um, and we were one of the first 100 couples, by the way, to get married in the state of New York. So I just want to put that out there. But when you see a show like Will and Grace, do you think that that show would have succeeded if it had been set in a small town in the Midwest?
I think there's a chance that it might have. I think a real strength of Will and Grace was the quality of the writing, and that's really often what it comes down to. You can look at format stuff as much as you want, but I think great writing, great characters, and in particular, great direction with James Burrows at the helm of that show. I mean, you really have a. I think it was hard for that show to. I think it would have been hard for that show to have been bad. That having been said, it didn't succeed at first. It reached a smaller audience than it really deserved for its first 2 or 3 years. So I think it really had a lot of challenge. So anyway, to answer your question, um, had it been set in a small town, I don't know, hard to say. There was somewhat of an imitator called Normal, Ohio, that was set in a small town with John
Mhm.
Goodman, maybe a few years, maybe in like '99 or so. There was a sitcom that featured Ellen that didn't last a season called The Ellen Show. So and those were both set in small Ohio towns, small Midwest. It was kind of an attempt to be like, can the gays get along in the Midwest? And the answer on those shows was no. But I think the answer on those shows was no because those shows weren't quite fully baked. Um, and then there was another show about gay folks around the same time called I think it was called Some of My Best Friends. It starred
Mm,
Jason
yeah.
Bateman and Alex Malfa, and that was another one that it just didn't quite fully come together in terms of the writing and the cast and the direction. So I think the setting, um, was certainly a component of Will and Grace's success. But I bet that show would have worked. I bet it would have done okay uh, had it been, I don't know, in Topeka or something like that. Would have been a very different show.
It would
But
have been absolutely a different
yeah,
show.
but I think a lot of things that made Will and Grace a lot of fun to watch, I think that would have worked in other settings.
I want to ask, with all the work that you do, and I think I know the answer to this, you become an activist as well. When did the activism really tap into all the work that you're doing? And I mean, these lines with the different hats that you wear, you just blend them so beautifully together. How were you able to really step outside of your writing to do the activism that you do?
I can tell you the exact moment when I really got serious about activism. It was right after, it was 2007, when the California Supreme Court overturned the state's marriage ban, and couples could get married for the first time in California. Gay couples, same-sex couples could get married. There was this photograph on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle of people celebrating in the Castro. And I remember looking at that photo on the front page of the newspaper. This is back when newspapers were a thing and you'd pick them up in a newsstand. And I remember thinking how wonderful it was and how happy everybody was at this victory. And then I remember thinking that there are going to be people who want to take this away. And I could not stomach that thought. And so that is when I started making videos with the help of my partner. The two of us started making videos where we were interviewing gay couples about why marriage was so important to them. And that's what kind of got me started on trying to, deliberately influence the world and make it a more, I don't know, a kinder and more humane place for people. I think a lot of us do activism without realizing it, simply by being out and vocal and by living our lives. Simple act of existing happily is, I think, an activist act as well. But to really become one of those, like, capital A, I'm trying to make the world a better place. That's where it got started. And the more I saw, the more potential I saw for, um, I don't know, using media, using communications and the stuff that we loved. The movies and film and television. People just love this stuff. This is the stuff that makes us happy and we look forward to. And if there's a way that can also make the world a better place, fantastic.
There's a great play called Daniel's Husband.
Mhm.
And are you familiar with the play?
I know the name, but I don't know what it's about.
Look it up, because I mean the play is brilliant, and it takes a turn. I want to give away the plot, but it really, really tells the importance of same-sex marriage and why it is so important that we be allowed to have marriages in the traditional sense of a marriage. And the play just covers it so brilliantly. I want to ask you, going back, if there was a particular, whether it be a gay actor, uh, or a television show or a moment that really made the biggest impact on you personally, both in a positive way and in a negative way, and why?
So, for sure, Hugo Weaving's character in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, gave me. I mean, there's somebody who's confident and, has challenges and difficulties in his lives, but he is confronting them, and he's very confident about being what he is. So I think that's somebody who meant a lot to me when I needed a role model to look up to. I think also RuPaul hosted that screening of that airing of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert on VH1, and this must have been like '96, maybe '90. I don't know, it must have been '97 or so. Um, and I remember RuPaul just popping up at the break, saying something funny and sassy, and then going to commercial, and then saying a few more words when we came back. And RuPaul was so unabashedly unashamed and not shy at all, and just seemed to be celebrating who they were. And I think that was I think that really gave me a lot of optimism and hope and confidence for, what life may lie ahead for a young gay teen like me.
And was there a moment or a character that hit you in a negative way? And and I don't mean that it necessarily turned you off or anything, but it really made an impact on you in terms of the way that you see the world.
Hmm. I don't know that it had a huge impact, but the first thing that comes to mind is in this movie Victim from 1960, I think it's 1963 or so, British film. There is a really horrible, self-loathing homosexual who's blackmailing other gay men.
Is this the Dirk Bogarde film?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, yeah, I just saw that recently, a few months ago for the first time.
yeah. It's an amazing work, fantastic film, and I remember seeing it in college. And I was going to college. This would have been around like 2000 or so, and very different climate, very different time, very different culture. But that was the first time I'd really thought about blackmailability as something that gay people might have to be concerned about. I was certainly not in a position where I was making a secret about who I was, and did not need to. I was very
Mhm.
fortunate that I didn't need to. I was going to college at Emerson College, a very gay-friendly school. I was going to school in Boston. It was 2000. I was doing just fine, but that really helped me reflect on how recent, 1963 might feel like a, a million years ago to young gays today, but it's a living lifetime for a lot of people. Just how recently it was a life-ending uh, revelation if people found out the truth about you. So yeah, that really opened my eyes to how precarious our safety can be.
Well, The Children's Hour is
Oh my
a
goodness.
is a brilliant film that deals with that, and even the original called These Three, where it's just about the innuendo of gossip and
Hmm.
what gossip will do with someone. In 1990, I was doing a show in New York called Men of Manhattan, and it dealt with gay life in Manhattan, 7 vignettes, and at that time, Out Magazine came out. Now, the original Out magazine, which is very different from Out magazine now. I think Out magazine is still out. I think it is. But at that time, uh, the writers or the people behind it were outing people. And they were outing people because they felt that it was important. I understand if you're a politician and you are still in the closet, uh, and you're espousing things that are anti gay and lesbian and transgender, whatever, that's a real issue. But some actors that stayed in the closet at that time did it because their careers could have been on the line. And so I always had a problem with outing for the sake of outing. Um, with all the work that you've done with the book and everything, is there any particular actor, whether they have portrayed gay characters on stage or not, uh, that really made an impact on you, again, as far as your activism is concerned?
Hmm. Someone who I've been learning a lot about recently is actually two people, Farley Granger and Arthur Lawrence. I recently did a video
Mm.
about Alfred Hitchcock's Rope,
Which, by
which
the way, that I watched Rope, and then I went and watched your video, and your video is amazing. Everybody, you're gonna have to get onto this channel. So again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but loved your video.
thank you. Thanks so much. Well, and Farley's life, in learning about him in particular, you asked about an actor. Um, he lived for so long and had so many different. I mean, Farley had a lot of lifetimes. As a kid who, as a very young boy, watching his family's finances fall apart and fleeing in the dead of night, rebuilding the family in Los Angeles, becoming a young actor, making entering the army and discovering a passion for performing there with Maurice Evans, another fantastic
Mhm,
actor, coming back and becoming a Hollywood heartthrob, and then going to Broadway and discovering a career there. And through he has a fantastic book. It's on the shelf behind me.
oh, I've got
Hit.
it too, yes.
Okay, great. Yes, Include Me Out. Farley's fantastic memoir, uh, where it's just an incredible journey through how much life for gay men in particular has shifted over, from the basically over the last century. We're coming up on what would have been his 100th birthday soon. And yeah, so I find his life really inspiring, particularly that he was able to find such happiness and fulfillment towards the end of his life, coming out and finally it being a safe climate for him to live a fully realized, fully open and out life. Gosh, what an incredible privilege to be able to
In
see.
his lifetime to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's just wonderful.
but the side of that is Arthur Lawrence's story, which was incredibly sad to me because yeah, I've got his biography as well, but he doesn't even delve into it as much as you do in your video.
Yeah, well, Arthur, I think, is a particularly complicated person, and is somebody who went through a lot of held a lot of different feelings about being gay. And it certainly seems like something that he came to terms with at the end of his life. Sadly, never had the opportunity to know either of these people, but the impression I got from listening to interviews and from reading their books is that, and you have to bear in mind, of course, the time that they were raised in. They come from a generation where being gay was assumed to be a mental illness and crime and, something to be cured. And so I see in when I read about Arthur's stuff, and particularly when I read his books, I see someone who really struggled in a particularly dark time. Going back to Leslie Jordan. Leslie Jordan has this really lovely way of, you might say, exonerating people who were less than kind to him in his past, by recognizing, as he puts it, they were doing the best they could with the light they had to see by. And I think that's true for a lot of people who have been fortunate enough to have lived long enough to see times change, and to have reflected on, there might have been a time when Arthur was in the closet, when he was trying not to be gay, when he was trying to date women and try to, quote unquote, cure whatever, people believed was an illness. I can't fault people for, doing the best they could by the light that was available at the time.
And thank
Uh,
you for saying this. I was watching a pundit on CNN a few weeks ago, and he was talking. They were discussing the issue that recently, unfortunately, happened in Kansas, with a young boy being shot by accidentally ringing the wrong doorbell. And there was an African American pundit, I wish I knew his name off the top of my head, who, rather than condemning the older man, tried to get into the mindset of the older man. And of course, he was not condoning on any level what happened, but trying to figure out where this man was coming from at this point in his life, that he lives in such fear that he sleeps with a gun next to his bed. That's a whole new show that we were not going to delve into. But I believe that everybody comes to the table based on what they've been fed, what they have been indoctrinated with, and where we are. And right now, um, there is such a backlash happening. We just had an election here in the county where I live in New York. Uh, Two women running on a platform to ban a lot of books in school. And believe it or not, these two women won. And it really concerns me that so many books and movies and shows are now being banned because all it takes is one person to stand up and say, I'm offended by this. And then they get a movement behind them. And I'd like to get your thoughts on all of this, with where you are with your own activism now when it comes to the fact that so many books. I just read that, for God's sakes, in Wilton Manors, of all places, one of the gayest counties in Florida, I don't think that's the county, but it's part of this county, um, they are not doing any drag shows during their Pride Festival for fear of being arrested.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy, and it's something, again, it hammers home why it's so important to defend our victories. Not just to celebrate. Um, yeah, I also think it's very disingenuous of these forces of censorship to say, "Oh, this is offensive, this is dangerous, we want to protect the kids." That's obviously not what's going on. It's politically expedient for them to identify a scapegoat, and perhaps they've even convinced themselves that they really are trying to protect the children or whatever. But Anita Bryant didn't really care about saving the children, and these people who are trying to censor Disney movies out of schools aren't trying to protect the children either. It's very disappointing to see just how much momentum they have at the moment. I don't think it's something that will last forever, but I think it's something that won't go away unless dedicated people do what they can to push back against it. And you know,
Well,
looking.
I'm sure that I can, hopefully speak for you when I say this. I don't know you well enough that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're a writer. You also have your own YouTube channel. You are responsible for the content that you put out there. And I'm sure that as a gay man, there are characters and there are depictions that over the years you've been offended by. Uh, my guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would not advocate those films or anything being wiped from our slate. I think of them as teachable moments where we can learn from what was presented as, at a certain time.
Sure. Yeah. I think I have a very high threshold for what I would, for when I would say that censorship is appropriate. I mean, I'm trying to think. My partner and I just tried to watch the movie Sonic 2, and it's terrible. And so I'm trying to, censor something because it's because it's awful, but not because it's offensive. It offended me on an aesthetic level. Uh, but but more seriously, yeah, sure. There have been, for example, depictions. I was just talking to a friend about this a movie or a TV show that we talked about a few minutes ago, Normal, Ohio. There's a character I want to say it's played by Orson Bean on that show, who I think is not well written, and whose dialogue is offensive without having any insight. So, and I would say that to distinguish it from, say, Archie Bunker. I think Archie Bunker is a fantastically offensive character for a very good reason. Um, and so, I certainly, in a million years, I wouldn't say like, well, Archie says some offensive things, so get him off television. I think Archie says some offensive things, and going back to what you said earlier, so let's think about why. I think All in the Family is, in addition to being an incredibly entertaining and amazing piece of art, really, like every one of those episodes feels like a little piece of theater. Uh, I think it's also this is going to sound like a weird word, nutritious show, in that
Mhm.
nutritious emotionally and intellectually. It's a show that you can watch as a sitcom, which most people think is junk food, but I think there is a emotional truth in what Archie says and believes that gives the audience an opportunity to reflect on, why is he like that? Why does he think that? Why is he, either, if you can see, if you stand far enough away, why is he so wrong?
Mhm.
Or if you're a viewer who's very close to Archie, um, it might give you an opportunity to reflect on your own prejudices, hopefully.
Hopefully,
Yeah,
hopefully. Let's
yeah.
hope so. But I want to get back to your book for a moment. First of all, the title is great.
Thank you.
Uh, did this come from your head, or did an editor come up with this title? How did the title come about?
I can't tell you the hours that we spent trying to, like, just wading through a pool of different possible titles. At one point, one of the ones that we were considering was, this is a very oblique reference. Uh, when I was in college, one of our textbooks was called Tube of Plenty. It was a book about the history of television that referred to it as the Tube of Plenty. So, kind of referring to television as a cornucopia. And so for a while, we were considering the title Tube of Pansies was one of the options that we were looking at. I'm glad that we didn't go with that one. TV Gade was another one that was up for consideration, kind of a pun on TV Guide. Oh, and we were also thinking, not that there's anything wrong with that, kind of referencing that episode of
Mhm.
Seinfeld, that notorious episode, famous episode. And so eventually, Hi Honey, I'm Homo. I don't remember which one of us. It was between me and my partner. We had these like marathon brainstorm sessions, long list of like good ideas ranked from best to worst. At some point that came up, and it was, for a long time, it was on the so bad it's good list that we were kind of laughing at, like, this is such a bad idea, it's funny. And then the longer we sat there, the longer we looked at it, we were like, maybe it just might work. And I ran it by the publisher, and they were like, great, we love it. Marketing thinks it's fantastic. And so, well, okay, who am I to argue with marketing? So here we are. I'm very happy that sailed through. It's also a bit of a reference to, I didn't realize this until much later, until it was locked in. There's a band that, there's a queer punk band that started in the 90s called Pansy Division. It's a lyric from one of their songs. And I didn't know that until like months after we chose the name. So I feel like I'm in good company with them. And then also it references somewhat. There was a sitcom in the 90s, very short-lived, that was very meta, called Hi Honey, I'm Home. It was a sitcom about sitcoms. And occasionally I would think about that show sometimes when I see the title of the book. So that's a sort of the genesis of that title. It also, I think, really filters out certain, if somebody picks that book up and they're like, oh, I'm clutching my pearls, I can't believe they would title a book something like this. I think that very quickly uh,
God,
sorts readers from whether it tells you whether this book is for you or whether it's maybe not.
and I'm always curious to know the first words that we read in your book.
Hmm.
Are they the first words you wrote?
No, actually, often I will wait until the very last moment to write the beginning of something. I think I often will put something kind of in place, sort of a formless lump, where I'm just like a little note to myself, like TK is like writing shorthand for fill this in later.
Mhm.
So I think an early draft of this book had something like TK emotional story about a fight. And so it was in my research process actually that I actually remember this moment. I was talking to the wonderful Marsha Posner Williams, who was started as I think a secretary or maybe script supervisor on Soap, worked her way up to associate producer, was a producer on Night Court and Golden Girls and many other things. I was interviewing her about her experiences on those shows, and she was describing this one night she was working late in the office before Soap was set to debut. It's an incredibly controversial show before it even aired. All
Oh
this
my God.
newspaper coverage, and people were up in arms, people were protesting, there were bomb threats, and somebody called the production office furious and wanted to know where they should write an angry letter about the show. And so
It had
Marcia
not even aired by this
had
point.
not aired. Exactly.
Okay.
Marcia being as spirited as she is, is like, well, I'm not going to take any more of this. And starts, not combatively, but talks back to the guy and is like, this thing isn't even broadcast yet. You don't know what you're even writing about, as nicely as she can, but still, like, not letting somebody push her around. And I'm like, this is such a great story. I got to open the book with this because Marsha's such a wonderful person and makes for a great character in the book. And that fight is so emblematic of, the I guess the hypocrisy of the people who are, aghast and mortified and offended and want to censor
Having
queer
never
people
seen
off
it,
television.
which I
Yeah,
love.
yeah. You've just been told that you're angry about this, but you're not actually.
Well, it's funny. I had a 20-year career performing as Carol Channing, and I performed
Mm,
all over the world as Carol.
mhm.
And I have performed in the most Republican towns you can imagine. And I've had senators and I've had congressmen on stage dancing and singing with me, and it was never an issue. And all it takes, like I said before, is one or two people to make this into an issue and blow it out of proportion. Um, I just recently did a show in Washington D.C. An area I want to talk to you about that as well, because we're going to talk about your little tour that you're about to embark upon. And I've got the perfect place that I think that you should do a book signing in Washington D.C.
Mm.
if you are interested. So, but I just performed there, and they recently, the night of my show, the Proud Boys sent a bomb threat. It had nothing to do with my show. It had to do with the fact that the next day there was going to be a Drag Time Story Hour, and so it's all crazy and people are up in arms about things that they don't know anything about.
Yeah, it's exhausting, and I can't even imagine the difficulties that folks like the Gay Activist Alliance and the people who fought against Nita Bryant. I mean, that was a time when they didn't have the momentum, the recent history of all of the victories that we had over the last 20 years, legislatively, culturally, etc. Um, Gosh, the ignorance that folks had to fight against, going even further back to Harry Hay and Frank Kameny and the folks who were activists in the 40s and 50s and Del and Phil Lyon,
Mhm.
like, oh my goodness, how brave they had to be. It's one reason why I think something that, and I don't know where to begin with this project, but something that I think every city should have, and something that Chicago has to an extent, a gay history walk where there are plaques on the ground, there are sculptures and busts, and there's physical interpretive elements throughout the history that tell the story of local gay liberation.
Mhm.
Um, because a lot of that stuff just disappears into the noise of history that people are like, well, that was 20 years ago. What could that possibly have to do with me now? So anyway, I think that is a great way to protect our wins and not put us in the position constantly of having to play defense, as you were, dealing with a bomb threat because people were so ignorant about,
Well, I didn't know anything about it until after the fact. They didn't
yeah,
tell me that it had happened that night.
good
I
grief.
started with where your book began with the first words. when did you know that your book was ready for us, the reader? Was it your decision? Was it an editor's decision? Was it the publisher's decision? Who had the
Well,
final word on that?
I'll be perfectly honest. I always feel like there's more to say. I could write 50 more books like this, and hopefully I will. I'm already outlining what my next one's going to be, but I was actually very fortunate. I actually had somebody helping me with this. Just before I was actually in the process of writing, I got a formal ADHD diagnosis. I don't talk about this much, but I got an ADHD diagnosis. Started working with a coach, an ADHD coach, basically to help me with my workflow and organizing myself. And she really helped me to prioritize the stories that I wanted to tell, how I wanted to organize this book, and the research that I wanted to do.
Wow, that's great.
And it gave me a real, like, I don't know what to call it, but
A
when
linear way of looking at things.
yeah, I backed out, looked at what exactly I wanted to say, and as it started to take shape, I'm like, well, I'm writing about Friends now. I'm going to write Golden Girls and Will and Grace and Modern Family and Bewitched, and all came together. And step back after I made a skeleton, fleshed out the skeleton, put the muscles on the skeleton, laid the skin on top to get really gruesome. Step back, and I was like, wow, there's a real story here. If you start from Bewitched to go up to Modern Family, through all that time, through all those people and all that work, all those shows, all those great jokes on the sitcoms, there's an incredible story about gay liberation here. And there it is. You pick the right shows, you pick the right episodes, you pick the right jokes. You're having a great time, enjoying all this fantastic comedy, and also absorbing an incredible journey that we as a community have been on for the last 60 years.
Now, is Seattle still your home base?
It is, yeah, still based in Seattle.
So I've got on the screen, you're going to be doing a book signing at Elliott Bay Books.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us who are not going to be there, I know that you're doing a talk back, and you're going to be telling some of your favorite gay jokes from sitcoms.
Yeah.
Can you share one or two with us right now?
Oh my goodness, yes. And so I'll be at quite a few places. I'm going to be doing the Strand in New York.
And you're going to be doing the Strand. I've got all of this. I'm pulling up.
Okay,
So
fantastic.
I'm ahead of you. So
New York, Chicago, Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, and hopefully, fingers crossed, a few more coming up. Gaysitcoms.com has all the details. But so you asked about, oh my goodness, my favorite gay joke. It's so hard to choose. It's so hard to choose. I have to go to the Golden Girls. And I have to go to this wonderful moment that's just so silly and I love this moment because knowing what an incredible ally Estelle Getty was. But Estelle Getty playing Sophia, of course, on the Golden Girls. Sophia and Dorothy are in the living room of the house, and Dorothy's college friend Jean is coming to visit. And Dorothy's a bit fretful. She says something along the lines of, I don't know if she's a very special person. I don't know if she'll get along with the other girls. And Sophia, knowing that Jean is a lesbian, basically she lays it out so well. She says, Jean happens to like guys instead of girls. Frankly, I'd rather live with a lesbian than with a cat, unless a lesbian sheds. That I don't know. It's such a great Sophia moment. It's because she's saying it's no big deal. I like a lesbian it's just like anybody else. But it's also slightly like her train is going a little bit off the rails. And it's just like a really lovely moment. And also, knowing behind the scenes that Estelle was such a...
Well, one of my favorite lines comes from that episode too.
Mm-hmm.
When she's referred to as a lesbian, and she's, well, isn't Danny Thomas?
Oh, my stars. Yes, yes. Not Lebanese, Blanche. And that joke actually made a research, I don't know, recurred about a decade later when Ellen DeGeneres was about to come out of the closet, but couldn't confirm anything because ABC hadn't approved it yet. So she's going on these talk shows. People are asking her about the rumors. She can't talk about it. And so Ellen's kind of deflection of that was, oh, well, we see what happens as the character learns that she's Lebanese. And and she tells that joke to Rosie O'Donnell, and Rosie, with this big grin on her face, is like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm Lebanese. And I was like, oh yeah, I've noticed that about you. Sometimes I feel like you're Lebanese. It's so silly that they couldn't talk about it at the time. But
do you remember? I mean, again, I'm older than you, but the night that episode Ellen aired, I remember being in the city with friends, a straight couple, and we all got together to have dinner and see it that night because it was a big, big thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's impossible to convey to to kids today, and by kids I mean people in their 30s, but is it possible to convey to folks who weren't, politically cognizant or, just like aware of being queer at the time, what a big deal that was. I mean, that was like, it was a moment where like the streets were empty, like the whole country was watching. 42 million people either watched that broadcast or saw some component of the broadcast somewhere else. 42. I mean, that's bonkers. And then the conversation that happened the next day, like somebody worked on the show, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been the script person. So the next day, she was walking down the street. She saw two young women holding hands, and she said to herself, "Did everything just change overnight?" And it did. It really, really did. I remember where I was too. I was in high school. I was at home alone. I don't remember where my parents and brother were at the time, but I was home alone. I was watching it when those words came out of her mouth. When Ellen leans in and says, "I'm gay," I I was on the couch. I stood up and sat down again. Stood up and stood. I literally jumped out of my seat and kept. I didn't know whether to stand or sit. I just kept going up and down because like the adrenaline that was going through me for her coming out, because I was closeted more or less to most of my friends at that time, and that really helped give me the push to know to reach that moment. And I think a lot of queer people have had this experience when you can't remember anymore how many people know that you're queer. That moment when you're like, at first you're like this person and this person. Okay, there's three. Now there's four. That moment when you're like, I don't know how many people know. Uh, that episode of Ellen helped get me over that little marker.
Well, it served its purpose. But were you surprised in your research and everything of how her career
Hmm.
nosedived after that?
Yeah, gosh, and it's not entirely a surprise because I think ABC really betrayed a commitment to her. They stopped promoting the show. They put a warning message on it, just like they did with Soap 20 years earlier.
Mhm.
But Ellen, she has the most chaste kiss in the world. In season 5, after she comes out, there's an episode where Ellen's character and another character have a kiss in a lesbian bar, and it could not be more innocent. Like literally, these two characters, if you watch this kiss, they're sitting on bar stools so distant they have to lean all the way in until they're almost falling over to get their mouths together. It's a brief kiss. It's sweet. It's romantic. It's actually romantic. It's not salacious at all. The audience doesn't go woo. Uh, Meanwhile, on the Drew Carey show, those characters are hooking up, and not Will and Grace, on Dharma and Greg. The pilot had just aired where she jumps onto him and throws her legs around. Oh, and we see them naked in bed, for heaven's sake. Heterosexuals can do whatever the heck they do, which frankly is a mystery to me. But the moment two women show the slightest sign of romance, they get a warning. I mean, so as Ellen said at the time, it was degrading. And yeah, so I think Disney and ABC and Bob Iger in particular bear a lot of responsibility that they've never really answered to for that.
Well, I want to bring on a comment. This is from my friend Matt Howe, and I don't know if you know him from the Barbara Archives, but
Mm.
he says, "From one Matt to another, I've been following you for years and love what you've given us content-wise. Thanks, Matt, for all you do. Love the 70s queer TV deep dives. I would love to see the two of you do a show together one night. So
Ooh,
that's
yes.
my wish for both of you.
Uh,
Or better yet, come on this show and let's have a conversation. I would
I'm
love.
happy to talk about Barbara at great length.
Yes, and Matt, I will bring up. He has an incredible book out as well, and I actually have it right here because uh, my ruby slippers are here, by the way.
Oh, you're the one who took them. Did you
I'm the
see
one
that?
who took them. I've got my own pair. But Barbara Strikes In, the music, the albums, the singles. Matt Howe, if you're still here, I'd love to have the two of you come on the show one night, and we'll have a great conversation. Matt, congratulations. It's a great book. I couldn't stop reading it. I can't wait for it to come out in physical form. Is that today or tomorrow that's happening?
That is next week. It's May 23rd. It comes out, but you can get a day early if you come to my event at the Strand.
Well,
So,
not only do I have it ordered, but I also have ordered the audio
oh, good.
version of your book. So I'm going to give my closing remarks and then I'm going to turn it over to you. And you've got the final word tonight. It could be about anything that we talked about that you want to expound upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message that you want to leave everyone with. Don't worry about how to end the show. As soon as you say goodbye, the final credits will roll. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight and prime time. And again, thank you for your patience tonight. I had a glitch here that I just couldn't, for some reason, it was not finding my camera. Gremlins were out there somewhere, but Matt, you were patient, you stayed, and I really appreciate it. I end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Call your favorite bookseller. If you're going to be in New York on the 22nd at one of my favorite bookstores, and thank God this bookstore is still there. Have you been there before, by the way, Matt?
No, the first time
Oh,
at the Strand. I'm very excited.
well, there's a lot. It's an incredible bookstore, so you're going to have a great time. And if I can get there, I'm going to try to get there as well. I'd love to meet you in person. It's a great bookstore. Call your favorite bookstore and ask for "Hi, honey, I'm Homo." And if they don't have it, tell them they should get it on the shelf. And then you can always reach out to Barnes & Noble, Amazon, your favorite bookseller, and order 2 copies. Keep one for yourself and keep one for that person in your life who's made a difference. But pick up the phone and call that person and let them know that they've made a difference in your life. Not an email, not a text message, not a private inbox message, a phone call. I believe it's very important, especially nowadays, that we reach out and that we're more interconnected than ever before, beyond social media. So I have a dear friend, he says we're all in the same storm, but we're in different size boats. And I always say, I don't care what size boat you're on, as long as you have a skipper by your side. And with that, I'm going to leave the screen, Matt, and you've got the final word. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And I'd like to echo what you said. What a beautiful sentiment, to reach out to somebody. My recommendation for anybody who wants to do a little bit of good for the world and for their friends is to reach out to somebody you like and invite them over or online to watch some queer episode of a sitcom together. It is a great way to connect with a friend, to have some fun together, and also to do a little good by spreading the word of queer characters and the stories of our lives. So that's my advice. If you need some inspiration, if you need to know some recommendations for best queer episodes of sitcoms to watch, pick up my book. I've got plenty in there. Or just reach out to me on social media, wherever you like. But yeah, so watch some funny gay television with a friend. That's my recommendation to the world. All right, thank you again so much for watching. Thanks to Richard for having me. I'll see everybody later.